Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Are we in a quorum?
We are not.
Now, Mr. President, it may have taken all weekend, but the Senate is now, finally, on the precipice of passing major bipartisan infrastructure legislation. Last night, an overwhelming bipartisan majority of senators voted to surmount the final few procedural hurdles and put the bill on a glide path for passage tomorrow morning. The bill will represent a substantial down payment towards the level of infrastructure investment our country needs. And for the first time, the Senate has come together around such a package in decades. I will have more to say about it before final passage. Now, all summer, I've spoken about how the Senate would proceed along two tracks when it came to infrastructure. The bipartisan bill we'll vote on tomorrow, as well as the budget reconciliation bill that will allow Democrats to make historic investments in American jobs, American families, and efforts to reverse climate change. In order to achieve such an ambitious legislative effort, I laid out two clear goals for this summer work period: pass the bipartisan bill and a budget resolution to set up the second track of our process before we leave for August recess. Many folks called that two-track process unrealistic. Many others said it's unachievable on such a short timeline and in such a slow-moving chamber. But we have managed to steer two trains at the same time. There have been some bumps, there have been some delays, but the Senate is on track to finish both tracks. Earlier this summer, I suggested the two-track strategy to President Biden and Speaker Pelosi. We all agreed it was the best way to move forward, and we are working in concert to make it happen. This morning, Senate Democrats unveiled our budget resolution with reconciliation instructions, which is the first step in unlocking the legislative process for a budget reconciliation bill later this year. Several members, many members, had a hand in crafting this package, and we worked closely with our committee chairs. But I want to especially thank the chair of the Budget Committee, Senator Sanders. He kept his nose to the grindstone and led our caucus on the budget. He always kept the thoughts and needs of American workers and families at the top of his mind. As a result, the Democratic budget will be the most significant legislation for American families since the era of the New Deal and the Great Society. It is big, bold change, the kind of change America thirsts for. I want to thank other members of the Budget Committee, like Senator Warner, who worked closely with the White House and Chairman Sanders to develop a framework, and Senators Murray and Wyden and Stabenow and Whitehouse and Merkley and Kaine and Van Hollen and Lujan and Padilla, all of whom came together, even though each had different views on different issues, to produce this result. And a great result it is. I want American families to understand what this legislation will mean for them. 4 simple things to keep in mind. And I'm borrowing Senator Stabenow's chart for this. It will lower costs for Americans. It will cut taxes for American families. It will create millions of jobs while tackling the climate crisis. And it will be paid for by wealthy paying their fair share. These are 4 goals. The American people support every one of them overwhelmingly. And in all phases, We will concentrate on communities that have been too often neglected, including communities of color and Native Americans, by making education, childcare, health care, and housing more affordable. We can give tens of millions of families a leg up. By making sure that we can get our children out of poverty, and I thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership on that issue. We can provide ladders to families that haven't had them before and help them climb into the middle class. Many of the policies we're proposing were in President Biden's American Jobs and Family Plan, but some go beyond, like expanding Medicare to cover dental, vision, and hearing benefits, something that was left out of Medicare at the beginning and never should have been, and we can rectify it now. By cutting taxes for tens of millions of American families, we can expand opportunity and make it easier for parents to pass on a better life to their children and their grandchildren. By making further investments in infrastructure, we can create tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs. And by finally tackling climate change, we can spare our country and our planet the most devastating effects of global warming. Just this morning, a major new report from climate scientists at the United Nations concluded that the nations of the world have only a small window to, quote, prevent the most harrowing future. Prevent the most harrowing future, in the words of the New York Times. Without immediate and bold action, we are staring down ever-worsening floods and heat waves, droughts and sea level rise. The future of our planet looks bleak until we do something right now. And the budget reconciliation bill will do more to combat climate change than any legislation ever in the history of the Senate. That is a promise. And while my Republican colleagues regurgitate the same tired talking points about a Democratic spending spree, let me remind America that we plan to pay for this package by making the wealthy pay their fair share. When our Republican friends held the majority in this chamber, they chose to use the same process Democrats are using now, budget reconciliation, to give corporations and the wealthy a massive tax break at a time of egregious income inequality. The former Republican majority rammed through a bill where 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. 83% of the benefits. I have nothing against the wealthy. God bless them. They're doing fine already. But it's time to cut taxes for American families, middle-class families, not multinational corporations. To make our tax code more progressive and more fair. That is what Democrats are going to do. Under this plan, there will be no tax increases on small business or American families making under $400,000. We're going to help small businesses create many, many, many jobs. We're going to give American families a fair shot. We're going to tell middle-class families we're going to make it easier for you to stay there with your increasing costs of things like child care and school, college, and so much else. We're going to tell poorer families you're going to make it easier for you to climb into the middle class with things like the child tax credit and better health care and so much more. And we're going to confront the generational challenge of climate change head on. We're not flinching, we're not wincing, we're going right at it. And as bad as COVID was this year, and it was horrible, 5 or 10 years from now, every year the climate change will make things worse and worse and worse, even worse than it was this year in COVID. Because when climate changes, it's such an overwhelming force that unless we do something now, we may not be able to stop it down the road. So, taking a step back, Mr. President, at its core, the Democratic budget is about restoring the middle class in the 21st century and giving more Americans the opportunity to get there. Unfortunately, the past 20 years in America have been a story of middle class decline. We have all watched as globalization and technology transform the way our economy works. Industrial manufacturing jobs were shipped overseas. A global financial crisis cost Americans their homes and their wealth. Giant conglomerates wiped out mainstream businesses from Arizona to Arkansas, from Michigan to Maine. The cost of raising a family, everything from childcare to college tuition, has become exorbitant, almost unaffordable, even for those solidly in the middle class. And now, after the worst pandemic in 100 years, American families are just starting to climb out of the rubble and looking towards the future. We want them to look towards that future with hope and with optimism, not with sourness and anger that we have seen throughout the land, exacerbated, played upon by the previous president. What the future looks like, in large part, depends on what we do here now. These next few months are crucial for the future of our country, even for our democracy. What we need to do in Congress is to give our workers, our businesses, our families a chance to prosper in a rapidly changing world, a chance to have hope, a chance to restore that American dream, which simply says, if I work hard, I'll be doing better 10 years from now than I'm doing today, and my kids will be doing still better than me. When Americans lose that faith, lose that hope, that sunny American optimism that's been part of our character for centuries, bad things happen. Bad things happen to our democracy, to our relationships with one another, to just about everything. The social contract in America relies on the fundamental promise of economic opportunity, the chance, through hard work, to do better for yourself and then give your children and grandchildren a better life than you had. That's what America's all about. That's what we're trying to restore and revivify here. When that promise is broken, when that American dream is no longer shining brightly in the sky, when faith in economic opportunity evaporates, we are not the America we were meant to be. We are not optimistic and entrepreneurial and forward-looking. Instead, we are bitter and angry and backward-looking, and as a result, much more prone to the sway of demagogues like Donald Trump. The divisions in our country and our politics today have their roots in the decline of economic mobility. Now, the American people don't expect one piece of legislation to solve all our nation's ills. No single law can do that. But we have to start in a bold, strong way, rebuilding the basic social contract for middle-class American families and for everyone struggling to get there. A promise of equal opportunity and equality, helping middle-class Americans stay in the middle class, building ladders to help others climb into that middle class. And at its core, that's what this budget is all about. And we are going to take the first steps towards passing it very, very soon. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin. Mr. President,
The Republican leader.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Last election cycle, Americans elected a 50-50 Senate, a closely divided House, and a president who promised unity and moderation. What have Washington Democrats done in response? They've set out trying to tax and spend our country into oblivion. They've handed the keys to domestic policymaking to Chairman Sanders and some socialist House members. In the spring, they passed a massive inflationary liberal spending bill that Democrats bragged was the most liberal bill in American history. Now this week, just a few months later, they want to start ramming through trillions more that will make that disaster look like child's play. They call it $3.5 trillion in spending. Nonpartisan experts say those plans would more likely cost Americans about $5.5 trillion. Trillions more borrowing and trillions more spending when inflation is already sticking American families with higher costs. New permanent welfare with no work requirements when small businesses are already struggling to find workers. Sweeping amnesty when the southern border is already in crisis. Green New Deal regulations when Americans' gas prices have already shot up, crushing tax hikes for family businesses and farms as they fight to recover from the recession. So apparently, tragedy and comedy really are two sides of the same coin. The tragedy is that Democrats want to inflict all this pain on middle-class families. Here's the comedy. They won't let Republicans have any say in this monstrosity, but they want our help raising their credit card to make it happen. Democrats want Republicans to help them raise the debt limit so they can keep spending historic sums of money with zero Republican input and zero Republican votes. So imagine a friend tells you he's flying off to Las Vegas to blow all of his money. He doesn't care that you think it's irresponsible. You aren't invited to come along, but he wants you to co-sign a loan for him before he leaves. Now, I understand the administration sent out the Treasury Secretary to argue that historically both parties have addressed the debt ceiling together. Of course, it's our Senate Democrat colleagues who have no interest in what is historically normal. Their borrowing and spending are historically abnormal. Democrats keep boasting about how wild and revolutionary their partisan vision is. So our friends across the aisle should not expect traditional bipartisan borrowing to finance their non-traditional reckless taxing and spending spree. That's not how it's going to work. Democrats have all the existing tools they need to raise the debt limit on a partisan basis. If they want 50 lockstep Democratic votes to spend trillions and trillions more, they can find 50 Democratic votes to finance it. If they don't want Republicans' input, they don't need our help. It couldn't really be simpler, and it really couldn't be more fair. Besides, I thought my colleagues were literally thrilled to present another reckless taxing and spending spree to the American people. I thought middle-class families were supposed to be delighted with their socialist shopping list. So shouldn't Democrats be proud to own all the debt it requires? Our colleagues seem confident that Chairman Sanders' vision is worth sticking our kids and grandkids with a massive bill. They deserve to have total ownership of that decision. Now, Mr. President, on a totally different matter, when the Biden administration announced its reckless retreat from Afghanistan in April, I made my opposition perfectly clear. But I wasn't alone one of the most prominent liberal editorial boards in the country responded to the president's move with this headline: Biden takes the easy way out of Afghanistan. The likely result is disaster. The administration's own top intelligence experts made a similar prediction. Quote, the Taliban is likely to make gains on the battlefield, and the Afghan government will struggle to hold the Taliban at bay if the coalition withdraws its support. The director of the CIA told senators that withdrawal would make his agency's job harder. And needless to say, the last time a Democratic administration tried a hasty retreat from the region offered a cautionary tale. Reality was clear to everyone but the very top of the Biden administration. From their bizarre choice of a symbolic September the 11th deadline to the absence of any concrete plan, the administration's decision appears to have rested on wishful thinking and not much else. The notion that Afghan forces might be able to stop the Taliban's advance with only over-the-horizon support, that's proven to be wishful thinking. That the Taliban might respond to the diplomatic plying of the international community, wishful thinking as well. As the administration's withdrawal proceeds at full speed, expert warnings have become deadly realities. The Afghan people, their democratic institutions, are literally being ripped apart by murderous theocrats. Nearly 1,000 Afghans have reportedly been killed already by Taliban death squads in the province of Kandahar alone. In the last 2 months, the militants have taken more territory in the last 2 months than they've held since 2001. And in just the last 4 days, the Taliban have raised their flag over six provincial capitals, including northern cities far, far from the group's historic base of power. Militants are engaged in a campaign to assassinate crucial members of the remaining resistance, from military pilots to top government ministers. All across the country, women and children are already suffering in particular. One recent report claimed Taliban militants beat a child to death because his father, listen to this, beat a child to death because his father served in the Afghan armed forces. What's more, the prospect of an emboldened al-Qaeda capable of threatening not only the region, but the American homeland is now a near certainty. No matter what the Biden administration tells itself about the state of that threat today. And yet, the State Department still mouths unbelievably naive platitudes like, quote, expectation is that the Taliban will work toward political settlement. Even as the Taliban spokesman asserted that the most recent attacks are just, quote, the beginning of retaliatory operations. So, Mr. President, does this sound like a group committed to peaceful means? Goodness sake, get a grip. This willful denial isn't just costing Afghanistan, it's already costing the American people and our interests. It's forced loyal coalition partners to second guess whether we can be trusted to finish what we start. It's led brave Afghans who earned promises of assistance to fear they'd be abandoned amid our incompetent, completely incompetent retreat. It's even left overwhelmed embassy personnel to urge remaining Americans in Afghanistan to leave immediately by any means available. So, Mr. President, this morning I attended a classified briefing from administration officials about current conditions on the ground. Look, needless to say, the briefers faced some tough questions about an entirely avoidable situation that is deteriorating faster every single day. And they'll certainly face more as global terrorists feed from the rise of an extremist government in Afghanistan. I, for one, have warned repeatedly that those who seek to harm us, our friends, and our interests, simply do not abide by our political timetables. They do not care if our leaders get tired of the task at hand. And this is not what victory looks like.
Mr. President.
The senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I attended the same classified briefing as the Republican Senate leader, and I listened carefully as the administration presented the realities of Afghanistan. And I was drawn to an historical analogy that was best captured in a short verse by Rudyard Kipling. It goes like this: when you're wounded and down on the Afghan plain, and the women come out to cut up your remains, just roll on your rifle and blow out your brains and go to your God like a soldier. That stark verse was a description of what happened to the British Empire when they felt that moving into Afghanistan would be part of their record of conquest. They learned otherwise. The retreat from Kabul has been reported over and over, but it basically was a retreat that killed every remaining British soldier, every member of their family, save one. They wanted one person, the Afghans did, to return to Queen Victoria and tell her what happened when they threw the British out of Afghanistan. A similar story can be told by the Soviet Union, now Russia. When they occupied Afghanistan with visions of changing that country forever to a Russian communist mode, they left bitterly disappointed, paying a heavy price. So 20 years ago, in the wake of 9/11, with 3,000 innocent Americans dead, we debated the issue on this floor as to whether the United States would follow the British and the Russians into Afghanistan. I was here. I was asked to vote, and I remember why I voted yes. It was simple. Those responsible for 9/11 and the deaths of 3,000 innocent Americans were holed up in Afghanistan, building their forces to strike us again. Would we respond? The answer was obvious, yes. No one gets away with that sort of an attack on the United States. And I voted for us to send our forces into Afghanistan. I dare say that neither I nor anyone else who voted for that decision ever dreamed that 20 years later we would still be in Afghanistan, having lost more than 2,000 American lives of the brave women and men who serve in our military there. Tens of thousands of people injured, trillions of American dollars spent with virtually nothing to show for it. What we learned, the bitter lesson for America, as it was for Great Britain and the Russians, is that Afghanistan has no appetite for outsiders. We tried to bring them dramatic, positive improvements in their culture and education, liberation of women, creating new opportunities, and maybe we had some marginal success. But it's a battle when you try to change a nation's ethic, and we learned it the hard way. At the briefing today, one of our colleagues, whom I respect very much, Senator Kaine from Virginia, I thought asked the most important question about the current situation in Afghanistan. He said it was his understanding that the United States had spent billions, maybe more, in the training and equipping of the Afghan military forces supporting the government, and that we had in fact trained and equipped over 100,000, maybe as many as 300,000 of these Afghan security forces. And now they are losing territory and melting away, into the landscape when they are under attack by the Taliban. And Senator Kaine said, I understand that there are only tens of thousands of Taliban and hundreds of thousands of Afghan security forces, and it appears we cannot hold our ground despite all the training, all the money. Was this a failure of training or more? And those representing the administration were very candid. It's not a failure of training. It is a mission that frankly cannot be accomplished. So when I hear the senator from Kentucky coming to the floor and begging us to stay, to what end? For what purpose? Senator Kaine, myself, and others invited him and the entire Senate to openly debate this question on the authorization for use of force in Afghanistan. There was resistance. And the idea of actually finally leaving Afghanistan after 20 years wasn't an original Joe Biden idea. If you'll remember, it was Republican President Donald Trump who actively engaged in the negotiation, picking a target date for our troops to be gone. He tried and wanted to achieve that before he left office. He didn't, but it was clearly his intent. So to blame the Biden administration for this decision, frankly, it's a decision that has been obvious for almost 10 years. There comes a point when we have to acknowledge that we cannot ask another American to die in a vain effort to change Afghanistan into a modern nation. That will only come when the Afghan people reach that conclusion. Mr. President, I ask an opportunity to speak on a different topic.
Without objection.
Mr. President, you know well, and I do too, that usually we aren't in session in this week of August. It's usually a time to head back home and meet with our constituents, eat our way through our state fairs, and enjoy some downtime with our families. This year I was looking forward to a visit by some of my grandkids to Springfield, where Loretta and I have a week or two of just getting to know the kids again. We didn't get to see them much last year because of COVID-19, and I was looking forward to the opportunity this year. But because we're in session, I was unable to. We hope maybe in a few days that changes. I think about those grandkids, all of my grandkids, 6 of them at this point, proud to say, and what kind of world we're going to be leaving them. The new school year is right around the corner, and along with all the normal supplies, they'll be buying face masks. For a young child, this pandemic must be confusing and scary. As a parent, you want to be honest with them, but you want to reassure them that everything's going to be okay. That goes for all the challenges of our day. Starting with climate change. This morning, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its first report in 8 years. It's an alarm bell to the world, warning that our climate is changing much faster than we anticipated. I'd like to read a couple paragraphs from this morning's New York Times because they summarize these UN reports and do that summary so well. Nations have delayed curbing their fossil fuel emissions for so long that they can no longer stop global warming from intensifying over the next 30 years, though there is still a short window to prevent the most harrowing future. A major new United Nations scientific report has concluded. Humans have already heated the planet by roughly 1.1 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the 19th century, largely by burning coal, oil, and gas for energy. The consequences can be felt across the globe. This summer alone, blistering heat waves have killed hundreds of people in the United States and Canada. Floods have devastated Germany and China. Wildfires have raged out of control in Siberia, Turkey, and Greece. So what do we say to our kids about this? Dad, Granddad, what are you doing about this? How do we reassure our kids that the planet they inherit is still going to be livable? Words aren't enough. Denial certainly isn't a plan. We need to do something. And we need to do what generations of Americans before us have done. Face reality, face the challenges squarely. So I ask myself, and all of us, what are we doing to make sure that my grandkids, and all of America's kids will be okay? We're going to have a chance to answer that question this week as the Senate begins debate on a proposal that will define the world my grandkids and everyone's kids will grow up in. President Biden's plan to Build Back Better is the most ambitious investment in America's future in a generation. And much of that plan is included in the budget blueprint that we'll be considering in a very short time. This budget blueprint will strengthen our nation's economy and ensure that working families have a fighting chance and receive a fair share of the wealth that their work produces. It'll help close the income and opportunity gaps between the wealthiest among us and working families who are struggling to make it. And most importantly, it will give American workers the tools they need to outcompete any country in the 21st century. I listened to the criticism of the plan by the senator from Kentucky, and I thought, if we don't embark on an ambitious plan to deal with climate change and to move this economy in the right direction for working families in this country, then frankly, we're ready and prepared, some are, to accept a second place finish for the United States of America. I think that's tragic. I don't think it's consistent with who we are as a people. The proposal by President Biden will build on a winning economic strategy we started earlier this year with the American Rescue Plan. Mr. President, you remember that American Rescue Plan. I do too, because last year, in the year 2020, when we were facing this pandemic, on 2, 3, or 4 separate occasions, emergency bills came before us, proposed by the Trump administration, negotiated with a Democratic and Republican Congress, presented to us on the floor, and there was virtual unanimity. Both parties stood together in the midst of a pandemic crisis to do what was necessary so that America could move forward. And then came the election, and then came the big lie, and then came the disintegration of this bipartisanship. When it was Joe Biden's turn to come up with the American Rescue Plan, not a single Republican senator, not one Republican congressman would vote yes, not one. So what was in the plan that was so objectionable? Could it have been the money invested so that we would administer the coronavirus vaccines to every American successfully? That was in the plan. How about more money that we put in that plan for businesses so they could re-enlist their workforce and start up again at the end of this pandemic? That was in the plan. How about the money that we promised American families, $1,400 payment, cash payment, promised by Trump, delivered by Biden? That was in the plan, and not a single Republican would support it, not one. All of a sudden, rescue plans became a partisan measure in the United States Senate and the House. The Republicans walked away from it. Well, let me tell you what the American Rescue Plan has done. It has revived our nation's economy. We're on a course for a historic recovery. In the first 6 months, President Biden's economy has added nearly 700,000 jobs a month on average. During the first half of this year, our economy grew at the fastest rate in nearly 40 years. The American Rescue Plan, which not a single Republican would support, worked because it provided financial relief to the people who needed it the most, working families, and that relief has benefited everyone. As part of this package, and you know it full well, Senator, because you were one of the authors, we enacted a child tax credit that we believe, fingers crossed, will cut child poverty in America by half. Think of that for a moment, by half. With the Build Back Better plan, President Biden is proposing to extend that child tax credit and reduction in child poverty. It's not just a 6-month commitment as it was under the rescue plan. Under the Biden Build Back Better plan, it becomes permanent. That enhanced child tax credit is already changing the lives of tens of millions of families across America. In my home state of Illinois, there are hundreds of thousands of parents who are now able to fill their gas tanks and buy groceries because of it. Let me tell you about one. Lydia, here's what she wrote. With the child tax credit, I'll be able to buy my kids their school supplies, clothes, what they need to get back to school, and put groceries on the table. In the wealthiest nation on earth, No parent should have to choose between clothing her children and feeding them. President Biden's plan to build back better is a blueprint for America's future, a future where every family knows the safety and dignity of financial security and every child can reach their full potential. I look forward to a vigorous debate in the Senate on these and other proposals in the budget blueprint. But right now I want to speak specifically to the funding the budget resolution provides for the committee I chair, the Senate Judiciary Committee. I see the chairman of that budget committee has come to the floor, Senator Sanders, and I thank you for crafting this important bill. This proposal will make historic investments in fixing our broken immigration system. Madam President, it's been 36 years since we've had any meaningful changes in our immigration law. You go back to Ronald Reagan as president. That was the last time. Simpson Mazzoli, names those of us who study the subject remember, but most people don't, I'm afraid. And yet that was the last time. Is there anyone who can say with a straight face that we don't have a broken immigration system in this country? We do. The proposal will give us historic investments in fixing it. These reforms have the potential to generate more than $1 trillion in economic growth over the next decade. I listened as a senator from Kentucky, the Republican leader, dismissed this whole conversation as blanket amnesty, and correlated all immigration problems to the current challenge, and it is a challenge, that we face at our southern border. The reforms that we have in mind will provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. Excuse me if I take this one personally, but it was 20 years ago that I introduced the DREAM Act in the United States Senate. As I say jokingly, at the time, if you ask people who are the Dreamers, they'd say a British rock group, right? Led by a fellow named Freddie. Well, maybe they were right then, but 20 years later, when you say Dreamers, and people say it frequently, you know who we're talking about. Kids brought to the United States by their parents who grew up in this country, pledged allegiance to that flag every day in their school classrooms, believed in their heart of hearts that they were American to the core, only to learn when the parents worked up courage to tell them when they were teenagers that they were undocumented. They were kids without a country. The DREAM Act said, we're going to give you a chance, young man, young woman. You can earn your way to legal status and citizenship. Keep your nose clean, don't get in trouble with the law, pay the necessary fees, and wait, and we'll give you that chance to become part of America's future. And even with that uncertainty in their lives, with the inability to qualify for even federal government loans to go to college, they have written some dramatic stories. We all know them. Those of us in public life have met them. They are doctors and nurses and dentists. They are on the front lines of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. They want to enlist, and some already have enlisted in our military. They are lawyers. They are entrepreneurs. They are amazing. And they did it all, never certain that they were going to be accepted in America. According to Senator McConnell, they're part of this blanket amnesty of these immigrants who want to come to our country. Forgive me, Senator, they're much more than that. They also take care of temporary protected status people. We have people in the United States who came here because of a crisis in their own countries. We accepted them. They've lived here for 20 years, and now, frankly, they're caught in the middle. We give them a chance to earn their way to citizenship. And farm workers. Madam President, do you know we have 2.4 million farm workers? These are men and women who get out and do the dirty, dangerous, hot work that Americans will never queue up to do. And they do it because we want fruits and vegetables on our table. We want meat and poultry processed safely, and Americans won't do the work. Let's just be very candid about it. And I know this based on all the people who've come to my office. These farm workers have been used by our country for years to pick our crops and deliver them safely to our tables. And we have a bill that we put together with the growers and the workers in total agreement that gives these farm workers a path to citizenship. When we had a hearing on it, the Senate Judiciary Committee, one of the Republican senators said, oh, just what we need, instant amnesty for farm workers. Do you know what that instant amnesty is like? You have to show that you have spent 10 years of your life working in the fields before you even qualify for the 9-year process that can bring you to citizenship. 19 years, instant amnesty? No, it isn't. And again, other essential immigrant workers who've been saving our lives and keeping our families fed during this pandemic. They're called essential workers, but the categories that created these essential workers were created by Donald Trump, not us, not Democrats. And we believe essential workers, whom we thank profusely during this pandemic, if they are undocumented, should have a chance at citizenship. Those are the groups we're trying to work to bring into America in a full-time status. They would expand funding for common sense measures that make our system safer for everyone by improving the process of asylum claims, will reduce immigration court backlogs, and start to secure our southern border. More than 200,000 DACA recipients are essential critical infrastructure workers. Tens of thousands of these young people have been saving our loved ones' lives as nurses and doctors and medical professionals. Hundreds of thousands of undocumented farm workers, who account for about half of our nation's farm workforce, do backbreaking labor every day to put food on our tables. These members of our communities have more than earned their path to citizenship. I'm going to get into the weeds a bit here, but I want to say under a Senate rule known as the Byrd Rule, any provision included in reconciliation must have a substantial and direct impact on the budget, and this impact cannot be merely accidental. That's kind of the roadmap for this budget resolution. I'm sure the senator from Vermont knows it well. Let's be clear. A pathway to citizenship as part of our immigration package on the budget reconciliation bill would have a substantial and direct impact on our budget. A pathway to citizenship for dreamers and immigrants with temporary protected status would have a budgetary cost of approximately $42.4 billion over 10 years, according to the Congressional Budget Office. This is a critical component of our economic recovery. There is no world in which this budgetary impact is merely accidental. $42.4 billion. Creating a pathway to citizenship, though, is not just a matter of cost. There are also benefits. It would boost our nation's GDP by $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. It would create 400,000 new jobs and increase every American's annual wage by an estimated $600. When, and when. There is ample precedent for passing this important legislation through budget reconciliation. Republicans have used this process to open up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska for drilling and enact a $1.9 trillion tax cut for the wealthiest Americans and corporations. In addition, in 2005, Senate Republicans used reconciliation to dramatically increase the number of lawful permanent residents by an estimated 3.2 million over 10 years. Now they're saying it doesn't belong in reconciliation. In 2005, they put it in. This is the exact same immigration status we're proposing to give dreamers, TPS holders, farm workers, and essential workers. I've tried for many years to pass a path to citizenship. Republicans have obstructed bipartisan immigration reform time and time again, including filibustering the DREAM Act at least 5 times. This year, I convened bipartisan immigration negotiations that dragged on for months. Republicans made unreasonable demands and insisted on attaching partisan provisions that would actually cut legal immigration. Republicans have rejected common sense measures to help secure our border. It is clear that the only viable option for passing immigration reform is through the reconciliation process. For those who claim they're concerned about our southern border, here's your chance. Here it is, to invest billions of dollars in smart and effective steps to improve border security. We need to provide a path to citizenship for dreamers and others who are contributing to our economy every day and who helped grow it for years to come. Madam President, I'm going to close by thanking the senator from Vermont. I don't know when I first approached him with this notion of including immigration, but from day one, Senator Sanders has been supportive of the concept and now has given us our chance. Millions of people who make America better are watching and hoping that in the next days and weeks, we can achieve our goal and give them a chance to find a path to citizenship and become an important part of America's future. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Madam President, let me thank Senator Durbin for his leadership in so many areas, including the understanding, as he just indicated, that the time is long overdue for comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship for millions of undocumented workers and families in this country. Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. Madam President, as a former mayor, I do understand how important physical infrastructure is. Roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants. And I am delighted that finally we are beginning to address our long neglected physical infrastructure. Frankly, it is rather incredible that year after year we ignore crumbling bridges and roads. And as we address our physical infrastructure, we can create a whole lot of good-paying jobs. So that bill that we are discussing right now is enormously important. But, Madam President, I will tell you what is even more important, and that is to address the long-neglected needs of the working families of our country, of the children, of the elderly, of the sick, of the poor, whether they are black or white or Latino, Native American, Asian American. These are needs that Congress has ignored for much, much too long. Now, I understand that Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, and others are really shocked by this bill. They cannot believe it. Imagine, just imagine, that the United States Senate is addressing the needs of working families and is going to stand up for ordinary Americans rather than just the wealthy and powerful. What is this world coming to? Don't we understand that here in the Senate, we're supposed to take campaign contributions from the drug companies and the insurance companies and the fossil fuel industry and from the 1% and do their bidding? Isn't that the way it has always been done here in the U.S. Senate? Well, Senator McConnell, things are changing. For once in a very long time, the United States Congress is going to stand with working families and not just the rich and the powerful. Further, above and beyond the economic crises facing working families, Congress has ignored the great existential threat of our time, and that is climate change. You don't have to believe me. Maybe some of my Republican colleagues might want to take a look at the IPCC report which came out today, which said that if we do not act boldly and immediately all over this planet, the world that we will be leaving our children and grandchildren will be increasingly unhealthy and uninhabitable. But you don't have to just read the IPCC report. Open up your eyes. Look at what is going on in California, the fires in Oregon, the fires in Greece, the drought that is impacting countries all over the world, which will mean a decrease in food production and water supply. Madam President, we have got to act now in order to save the planet. There is no choice. We cannot go home and look our children and grandchildren in the eye if we do not act now and lead the world. We can't do it alone. We're going to have to work with China and India and Europe, but we cannot continue to ignore this existential threat. Madam President, the gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is wider today than it has been in 100 years. People on top doing phenomenally well. In fact, we have two people in America today who own more wealth than the bottom 40%. The top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92%. And since 2009, the Wall Street collapse, 45% of all new income has gone to the top 1%. And incredibly, during the pandemic that we are experiencing now, billionaires in America have seen their wealth increase by $1.8 trillion during this pandemic, while at the same time, thousands of essential workers died, providing the goods and services we needed. Billionaires become richer. Ordinary people have to go to work, public transit, grocery stores, hospitals, and thousands die. While some of our multi-billionaires are spending some of their enormous amounts of money flying off into outer space, today and in the coming days, we are going to address the crises facing working families right here on the ground on planet Earth. And that is why, Madam President, as chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, I am proud to introduce a $3.5 trillion budget resolution that we will soon be considering, I expect tomorrow. This is a budget resolution that will allow the Senate to move forward on a reconciliation bill that, in my view, will be the most consequential and comprehensive piece of legislation for working people, for the elderly, for the children, for the sick, and for the poor that this body has addressed since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the New Deal, and the 1930s. Madam President, this is a budget resolution that will address the needs of working families because we understand, if our Republican colleagues do not, that there is something fundamentally wrong when real inflation accounted for wages for working people has not gone up for almost 50 years. We have seen in recent years, as everybody knows, an explosion in technology, an explosion in worker productivity. And yet, in real inflation accounted for dollars, while the very, very rich become much richer, real inflation accounted for wages for workers has not gone up in almost 50 years. What does that mean? It means the cost of health care has soared, cost of education has soared, cost of housing has soared, and yet real workers, the working families of this country are earning in real dollars the same wages that they did decades ago, which means that many of them are struggling right now to keep their heads above water economically. Madam President, in the richest country in the history of the world, half of our people should not be living paycheck to paycheck, worried about how they're going to pay their rent or provide food for their kids. And this legislation, in so many ways, begins to address the working families of our country, but one important way, maybe the most important, is as we address the needs of our people in health care, in education, in climate, we are going to create many, millions of good-paying jobs that the American people desperately need. Madam President, I want to say a few words today about the budget resolution that we are introducing and what is going to be in the reconciliation package that we will soon be undertaking. For a start, one of the questions that everybody is going to ask is, well, how is this going to be paid for? Expensive bill. $3.5 trillion, you know, that's a lot of money. It is. Well, I happen to think, and I know that you do as well, Madam President, that maybe, just maybe, the time is now for the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations who are doing phenomenally well, but in a given year, many of them have not paid a nickel in federal income tax. The average Joe, the average Mary out there, they're working, they're paying their fair share of taxes. But if you're an Amazon, if you're a Jeff Bezos, if you're one of these multi-billionaires, you got lobbyists, you got accountants, you got lawyers, and you can avoid paying your fair share of taxes. So what some of us are saying is that maybe, just maybe, even if you are a billionaire, even if you are a large, profitable corporation with all kinds of lobbyists and accountants, maybe you should start paying your fair share of taxes. My Republican friends say we're going to be raising taxes. Well, you're right, we are. But we're going to be raising taxes on the wealthiest people in this country, something which is long overdue, and yet nobody in America earning less than $400,000 a year will pay a nickel in taxes, and many will actually be paying less in taxes. So my Republican friends can complain all that they want, but I do believe, and the American people do believe, that the time is now for the wealthy, the powerful, for large, profitable corporations to start paying their fair share so that, in fact, we can lower taxes for working families in this country. Madam President, I think the American people have already begun to see what good public policy for working families can mean. In Vermont and Massachusetts and all over this country, working families, the vast majority of our families, are now receiving a $300 per month check per child. And this is long overdue. Some say this is a radical idea. It's not. It is exactly what countries all over the world do because they understand, and we understand, how difficult it is today for working families to raise children. And I am enormously proud of the fact, and everybody in this chamber should be proud of the fact, that at a time when the United States has by far has one of the highest rates of childhood poverty of any major country on earth, as a result of the work in the American Rescue Plan, which must be extended in the reconciliation bill, we have reduced childhood poverty in America by 61%. 61%, because we're now getting the resources out to moms and dads that they need in order to adequately and decently raise their kids. So, Madam President, you know, I hear a lot of talk about how we love our kids who are the future of our country. Well, if we love our kids, we have to love their parents as well. And we have to make it easier for parents to raise their kids. But it's not just the child tax credit. I suspect that there are very few people in this country who do not understand how dysfunctional our child care system is. We are not living in the 1950s where dad goes out to work and mom stays home with the kids. And that's not the case anymore. Has not been the case for a very long time. Dad is out working and mom is out working, because families all across this country need two breadwinners in order to pay the bills. Well, mom's working and dad's working. Who is taking care of the kids? And that is, in fact, a major, major crisis in this country. And the current system just is not working. In my state, state of Vermont, it cost $15,000 a year, which is about the national average, to send your child into childcare. What does that mean? It means that if you're making $60,000 a year, you're spending a quarter of your income just to make sure that your child is well taken care of while you go to work. If you have two kids, forget about it. Doesn't pay to go to work because you're spending so much on childcare. Everybody understands that. That is not a debate. So the time is long overdue, not only to protect the needs of working families, but also to provide well for our children. Psychologist after psychologist have told us that the most important years of human development are 0 through 4. And yet so many of our kids all over this country are sitting in front, little kids are sitting in front of TV sets, not getting the kind of nurturing, emotionally and intellectually, that they need. This legislation begins to change that. Under our proposal, no working family in this country should be paying more than 7% of their income for child care. Working parents, do you hear what I just said? No more than 7%, not 30%, not 25%. And that is what we should be doing. And we have so much work to do in child care, and I know the presiding president understands that. We got to build new facilities for kids, because once we open the door for affordable child care, the truth is we don't have enough space to accommodate the children. And we have got to start paying child care workers the wages they are due for the enormously important work they are providing. We got child care workers in America today making less than McDonald's workers. What an insult. How wrong is that? So this legislation is going to provide increased subsidies for working families to afford child care. We're going to pay workers in child care living wages and benefits, and we're going to build the new facilities that we need to accommodate the families who will now have the opportunity to take advantage of child care. But in terms of our children, who we have ignored for so long, we're going to do even more than that. We are going to make pre-K education for 3- and 4-year-olds free. God didn't create an education system that begins in kindergarten. It's created by human beings, and the world has changed. And what we have got to understand now, with so many of our parents working, that we have got to make pre-K education for 3- and 4-year-olds free. And that's what we do in this legislation. And by the way, not widely reported, but when we revolutionize child care and pre-K so that moms and dads know that their kids are in quality and affordable facilities, we're going to see more than 1 million women able to go into the workforce, because they no longer have to stay home to take care of their kids. They want to work, and we will give them the opportunity to pursue their careers. Madam President, you know and I know that there is something a little bit absurd that the United States of America is literally one of 2 nations in the entire world, and I'm talking about poor nations, that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave. What does that mean? What it means that there are workers today who are at work when they're sick, Maybe they're spreading the virus or some other illness. There are working families that have to make a choice. Does mom go to work and leave her sick child at home alone? Or does she stay home and maybe lose her job? I have talked, and I'm sure the presiding president has spoken to women who gave birth to a baby and a week later were forced to go back to work because they had no income coming in. I know this may shock some of my Republican colleagues, but there are countries all over this world who understand that it is enormously important that parents be able to bond with their babies. And in countries around the world, women get 4 months, 5 months, 8 months off with full pay or with a significant part of their paycheck in order to stay home with their newborn babies. So finally, we are beginning, more to do, beginning to end the international embarrassment of the United States being the only major country on earth not to guarantee paid family and medical leave. Madam President, I know you have been involved in this issue. I have, and a number of our colleagues have, in the understanding that in the contemporary global economy, if our young people are going to go out and get decent paying jobs, shock of all shocks, they actually need to have the skills and the education in order to perform those jobs. So you have a situation now where there are jobs all over this country that are lying vacant, not being taken because people don't have the skills. Now, I personally believe we should do what other countries are doing, and we should make all public colleges and universities tuition-free and should forgive all student debt. That is not in this bill. But what is in this bill is a beginning, and that says that we will make community colleges in this country tuition-free. Now, what does that mean? It means a couple of things. It means that if I go to community college, I can learn a skill, whether it is nursing, whether it is construction trades, whatever it may be, I can learn the skills that I need to go out and get a job that pays me a living wage. And that is enormously important because especially as we rebuild this country, as we begin to pay attention to health care and to child care and to taking care of our parents and the disabled people, we need skilled workers. And making community colleges tuition-free for 2 years is an important step forward in allowing people to gain those skills. But also, for those people who want to go to a 4-year college, those 2 years of community college credits are transferable. So your tuition is paid for the first 2 years. My hope is that we will soon be able to pay for the next 2 years as well. But this is a real start in allowing millions of young people to get an education today that previously they could not afford. Madam President, 2 blocks away from where we are in the nation's capital, there is an encampment of homeless people. All over this city, you can't drive down the nation's capital and not see people sleeping out on the street. And that is true in virtually every major city in America. Once again, richest country in the history of the world, and some 600,000 Americans are homeless. And then on top of that, you got about 18 million households where people are spending 50% or more of their limited incomes to put a roof over their heads. Now, how do you survive economically if you're spending 50% of your income on housing? This legislation will create a huge number of good-paying jobs by the largest investment in American history in low-income and affordable housing. And I see the chairman of the Banking Committee here, and I want to thank Senator Brown for his important work in that area. Just a few days ago, I had a chat with a gentleman whose wife is seriously ill. He works, and he pays for the home health care that she needs. And it's an expensive proposition. What we understand is that in an aging society, and at a time when we have so many people with disabilities whose needs are not being met, that it makes eminent sense to bring skilled home health care workers into the home rather than to force people to go into a nursing home, which, by the way, is more expensive. And this legislation, reconciliation bill that we will soon be working on, will make historic investments in home health care and make sure that those workers, like child care workers, who do such important work, are adequately compensated. Madam President, IPCC today reported what all of us know, and that is if we do not begin in an extremely aggressive way, transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel, the planet that we will be leaving our children will be increasingly unhealthy. It really does take your breath away to look at those photos, whether it's Oregon, whether it's California, whether it's Greece right now, and see flames consuming entire communities. And if anybody out there thinks that, gee, isn't this too bad that it's happening this year, you got it wrong. It's only going to get worse if we do not act and act boldly, which is why this legislation will pour hundreds of billions of dollars in the fight to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, including a civilian climate corps, which will give the young people of this country the opportunity to roll up their sleeves, get decent pay, get educational benefits in order to do what is so much in their hearts, and that is to combat climate change. Madam President, I wish that I could tell you that my Republican colleagues understand the crises facing working families and that they understand the moral imperative of us having to address climate change and that we are working together to do, in fact, what the American people want, create millions of good-paying jobs, addressing the needs of working families and climate change. I wish I could tell you that, but I can't. As we go forward, in all likelihood, we will not get one Republican vote. We're going to have to do it on our own with 50 Democratic votes here in the Senate, plus the Vice President of the United States. Now, some of my Republican friends will say, well, that's such a bad idea. Why aren't you more bipartisan in terms of reconciliation? Well, I would remind my Republican colleagues that they didn't have a problem with reconciliation when they gave almost $2 trillion in tax breaks to the very richest people in this country and the largest corporations. No problem doing that. They didn't have a problem with reconciliation when they tried to throw 30 million people off of the health care they had by abolishing the Affordable Care Act. So that's where we are. We are facing a crisis facing working families. We need to create millions of good-paying jobs. We need to tackle the existential threat of climate change. We need to expand health care and Medicare so that elderly people have dental care, eyeglasses, and hearing aids. We need to lower the cost of prescription drugs and have Medicare negotiate prices with the pharmaceutical industry. We need to make sure that we get doctors and nurses and dentists into underserved areas. So, Madam President, tomorrow begins one of the very important debates that we have ever had. And the question is not complicated. Do we have the courage to stand up to powerful special interest and tell the corporate world and the 1%, yeah, you are finally going to have to pay your fair share of taxes so that we can create millions of good-paying jobs for working families, so we can protect our children, protect the elderly, and address the threat of climate change? That is the issue, and I have absolute confidence that we will, in fact, rise to the occasion and do what the American people want, and that we will pass the budget resolution tomorrow. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.